She arrived not through ceremony, but through shadows, wrapped in linen smuggled inside a rug, unrolled at the feet of the world's most dangerous man. Julius Caesar didn't flinch. He looked down into eyes not pleading but piercing. Welcome to Omar's Story Nook, where history gets spicy, legends get a remix, and imagination runs wild. Every tale you hear is a whisper of Omar, echoing across time, culture, and the soul. The year is 48 BCE. Egypt simmers with tension, Rome smolders with ambition, and in the center of this storm, two figures emerge. Cleopatra, not just a queen but a scholar of seven tongues, a strategist wrapped in silk, her eyes reading maps and men alike. Julius Caesar, not just a general but a tactician of republics and wars, a man who crossed the Rubicon with lightning in his heart and empire in his grasp. History remembers them as lovers, a scandal whispered through centuries. But what if the truth was sharper? What if Cleopatra didn't seduce a general, but chose a partner? What if Caesar didn't merely conquer Egypt, but accepted the queen's proposal? This is not a love story. It is a pact, forged in shadows, sealed in silk, written in gold and ambition. A secret alliance meant to shape the world. Not for Rome, not for Egypt, but for something greater. A unified empire led by two minds, two visions, and one legacy. She arrived not through ceremony, but through shadows, wrapped in linen smuggled inside a rug, unrolled at the feet of the world's most dangerous man. Julius Caesar didn't flinch. He looked down into eyes not pleading but piercing. Not a girl, but a queen. Cleopatra didn't apologize for her entrance. She rose like a wisp of incense, her voice low and measured, her questions sharper than any dagger. He expected flirtation. He got negotiation. He expected submission. He found sovereignty. Their first conversation wasn't about desire, but dominion, grain, roots, power. By candlelight and scroll, they charted a Mediterranean future. She offered the treasures of Egypt, not in gold alone, but in philosophy, astrology, and the loyalty of her people. He offered legions, not just of men, but of momentum. Together, they imagined a world unbound by Senate walls, a Rome that stretched not through violence, but through vision. An Egypt that no longer bowed to foreign hands, but stood beside its so-called conquerors equal, elevated. In that room, beneath papyrus maps and the sound of Nile winds brushing the palace, two empires didn't collide. They aligned, and somewhere between strategy and stargazing, between Latin proverbs and Egyptian riddles, something more began to bloom. Not just attraction, but a conspiracy of greatness. They met beneath moonlight, in a garden hidden by papyrus and perfume. No guards, no scroll bearers, just two rulers wrapped in linen and quiet fire. The air smelled of jasmine and wine. Above them, stars shimmered over the Nile like gods leaning in to listen. There, without crowns or ceremony, they made a pact, not inked on marble, not shouted from balconies, but sealed by whispered promises and a single kiss at the edge of revolution. Cleopatra would remain queen, not by Rome's permission, but by her own cunning. Caesar would crown Caesarion, their son, and declare him heir to two worlds, the wolf of Rome and the son of Egypt. In return, Egypt would back Caesar. In Gaul, in Hispania, even in Germania where the forest whispered rebellion. They spoke of more than war. They dreamed of a shared capital, a second Alexandria, where temples rose beside forums, where Roman aqueducts flowed beside lotus-lined canals. They saw a world ruled not by brute strength, but by culture, language, mathematics, and myth. And as palm fronds rustled and torches guttered low, they stamped their private treaty, not with wax, but with trust and fire. No Senate would know, no record would survive. But that night, in the shadows of a garden made for gods, an empire began to shift, the world at their feet. Rome had seen triumphs before, generals returning from conquest, parading slaves and spoils through the forum, but never like this. When Julius Caesar returned to Rome, he did so with gold grain and a queen, not in chains but in glory. Cleopatra followed weeks later, not veiled in mystery but unveiled in majesty. Her barge sailed up the Tiber like a dream, gilded in gold, perfumed with lotus oil, a canopy of peacock feathers trailing incense in the breeze. And beside her, oh boy, Caesarion. He was not yet crowned, but his bloodline sparked a silent quake through the Senate halls. As Cleopatra stepped onto Roman soil, robed in Egyptian linen, crowned in diadem and poise, the city paused. Some bowed, some gawked, some hissed. Bread flowed from the state. Gladiators fought for the crowd. The people were fed, entertained, and distracted. Behind closed doors, Caesar and Cleopatra moved like twin storms. He expanded policies. She softened edges with diplomacy. Their cultures began to fuse. Greek academies in Roman villas, Egyptian astronomers advising generals. But beneath the applause, the Senate whispered. Old men in togas feared what was coming, because this was not a love affair. It was a takeover. Slow, elegant, irreversible. Rome was shifting, and the Queen of the Nile was no longer just a guest. She was becoming the future. They gathered in corners. Senators, statesmen, scribes turned spies, patricians who once toasted Caesar's victories, now passed daggers beneath togas. They whispered of tyranny, of betrayal, of a foreign queen whose eyes saw too much. They called her a sorceress, a manipulator, a threat. But Cleopatra knew Rome's games better than the men who played them. She had her own informants, her own spies, her own gold. On the eve of the Ides of March, while Brutus paced by torchlight, a scroll arrived in his chamber. Unsealed, unsigned, it bore no words, just a coiled cobra drawn in red ink. The meaning was clear. You strike, we strike first. The conspiracy faltered. A few backed out, others were warned publicly, humiliated, ruined. And when morning came, Caesar walked freely through the forum, untouched. Later that month, he summoned the Senate and purged it. No more whispers, no more daggers, only decree. He named himself Imperator Perpetual, Emperor for life, and beside him, unveiled and uncowed, stood Cleopatra. Rome gasped, but it could not resist. Temples began to rise with Egyptian spires. Coins bore Caesarion's face. A new imperial line was declared. Not Brutus, not Octavian, but a queen's son, born of Nile and Tiber. The republic was dead, but something older, grander, and far more dangerous was now alive. Time passed, but history did not return to its former shape. Rome no longer stood alone. It had a sister, cloaked in gold, wreathed in incense, crowned in sun. The Roman Egyptian Empire was born. From the sands of Giza to the forests of Britannia, the world transformed. Columns of marble rose beside obelisks. Latin scrolls shared space with papyrus scriptures. And where eagles once flew alone, they now soared beside the eye of Horus. Cleopatra and Caesar ruled as two flames, opposites yet bound. Warrior and priestess, strategist and star reader, emperor and empress. Together, they raised Caesarion, not just as heir, but as symbol of unity, of vision, of what the world could be when power was shared, and fear did not drown difference. In the city once known as Alexandria, a new capital flourished, with libraries that never banned, and temples that taught peace alongside law. Gone were the days of conquest for conquest's sake. Now, the empire expanded through art, Trade, invention, some still resisted. Old senators grumbled. Priests in Rome scowled, but none could deny that the people lived fuller, that the rivers of culture flowed freer. They say if the alliance had ended in blood, Rome would have drowned in it. But instead, history shifted. Perhaps the future did not belong to the sword, but to the scroll, to the crown, and the crescent moon. Some love stories rewrite art. This one tried to rewrite history until the next whispers of Omar. Stay listening.